So welcome to this public webinar, which is a joint meeting hosted by the Jewish Network for Palestine and the Socialist Labour Network. I'm on the steering committee of the Socialist Labour Network and I'm chairing the meeting this evening. As Israel continues its wars in the south and north whilst practicing murderous apartheid against the Palestinian people in Gaza and the West Bank, some still hold that the only way forward is to reconstitute Palestine on the basis of the tiny amount of land left to Palestinians, while somehow removing 700,000 Israeli and foreign Jewish settlers from the West Bank and East Jerusalem. So our question is, how can Israel, as a Jewish supremacist settler colony, be somehow reborn as a good neighbour to a truncated, fractured and demoralised Palestinian state? Whilst the imperialist powers, including the British Labour Party, still claim to want a two-state solution, but is it viable and is it just? How can Palestinians possibly live in peace and security next to Israel? Or, for that matter, how can Lebanon, Syria, or any other neighbouring Arab state live safely with a dangerous US client regime on their doorstep? This evening we'll be addressing some of those issues and more, and we will hear from speakers with their perspective on the future state for the people of historic Palestine. And we will hear from Tony Greenstein, Garda Karmi, Rania Khalek, Haim Rashid, and Ali Abunimar. First of all, we are going to hear, in not the usual order, from our comrade, Tony Greenstein. Over to you, Tony.
Okay, thanks. Haim Rashid, who was supposed to be starting this off, has sound problems at the moment, so I hope he will be joining us later. The first thing I want to do is welcome everyone to the meeting. We are now 1 year after the beginning of Israel's war on the Palestinian people of Gaza, and there's no sign of it ending, quite the contrary. The war seems to be expanding first to Lebanon and quite possibly to the region as a whole. So we are in quite cataclysmic times in a sense. The question really is what conclusions we draw and what sense we make of the situation to date. And the first thing really that I want to say is that it is extremely clear what Israel's objective in Gaza is. And indeed, its objective, if it could succeed militarily in South Lebanon as a whole, and that is the ethnic cleansing of those populations. I mean, large sections of the Israeli state, the government have talked about resettling Gaza and turning it into a place where they can have hotels, beaches, tourists, and so on. So I don't think we can be under any doubt. And there's also, of course, because the original aims of Zionism were the land of Israel, and that's a biblical concept. And the land of Israel, what was apparently promised to Abraham, stretches from the Litani right down to the Nile and then across to the Euphrates in Iraq. So there's plenty of room for expansion. I'm not saying it is going to expand that far, but Israel, ideologically, Zionism has a justification for any expansion, and we can expect our Western leaders to support it in that goal. But regardless of the military outcome of the present struggles, and clearly Israel is finding great difficulty despite its overwhelming firepower in Gaza. Most people will agree it's actually suffered a military defeat there. It hasn't been able to eradicate Hamas, which simply reoccupies whatever area Israel is forced to abandon. The question is what will happen in Lebanon. Of course, Rania is more of an expert in that than me. I can just really throw out some observations. There is no doubt that the pager explosions, coupled with the assassination of Nasrallah and most of Hezbollah's military leadership, is a severe blow. I don't think we can escape that. But the key question for me is what happens with the ground invasion in the south of Lebanon. And I would expect that Hezbollah, despite the blows it suffered, will in fact turn out to repeat what happened in 2006 when Israel was forced to withdraw with heavy casualties. I mean, that's my own observations, and as say, Rania may have things to say about that as well. But whatever happens, whatever the military outcome in the short term, I have no doubt whatsoever that Israel has suffered a major political defeat in this campaign over the last year. Never has it been so clear what Israel is about. For a very long time, people swallowed the illusion spread by Zionism that you could be both a Jewish and a democratic state. And I think it should be clear to anyone who has eyes to see that those two are diametrically opposed. You can either have a Jewish state or a democratic state. You cannot have both. And in that sense, of course, Rabbi Meir Kahan of Kach, who was elected to the Knesset in 1984, and remember that even his opponents in Likud and Labour described him as a Jewish Nazi then. His heirs, Ben Gvir and Otzma Yehudit, are now part of the Israeli cabinet, and no one says a word in the West about that fact. They are also clear about Israel being a Jewish state before a democratic state. So those Western leaders who pay lip service to the idea that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East are, of course, the complete hypocrites that they are, because the reality is that whatever Israel does, it will have their sanction in the end. And we remember Joe Biden, for example, laying down all sorts of red lines. Invading Rafah was a red line, but what happened to that red line? It simply disappeared. Israel, in essence, has carte blanche almost for anything it does. And that is one of the lessons that we have to draw from this. There is really no holding back. I mean, I used to ask myself, is there anything Israel could do which the West would be vehemently opposed to and stop? And the answer I get is I don't think there is anything, maybe bar using its nuclear weapons. I mean, I can't see any limits or any restrictions, as Israel is preparing for maybe a war on Iran as well. So although Biden says he's opposed to a regional war, we can take that with a pinch of salt, to say the least. But as I said, there has been a political defeat for Zionism. And there's also, I think, the shedding of the illusion that there is a left wing and a right wing of Zionism. There are different wings of Zionism. It is clear beyond any doubt that the differences within Zionism are tactical differences at best. We have, for instance, the leader of the now the unified Meretz and the Israeli Labour Party, because what was socialist or left Zionism has all but disappeared, Yair Golan, who was the deputy chief of staff, advocating the invasion of South Lebanon. So he's actually going in advance of some members of Likud, for example, who've been urging caution. So anyone who believes that there are real differences within Zionism is living a complete illusion. It is a lie. And we know that because the fundamental goal of Zionism always was the creation of a Jewish state. And that was based on the idea of a Jewish nation. And therefore, a nation has the right to self-determination. Of course, Jews are not a nation. They're members of every nation. But that was the essence of Zionism. that it had to create a Jewish state. Of course, there were fragments of Zionism, Echad Ha'am, the cultural Zionists and so on, who spoke of a cultural center rather than a state. But they disappeared. I mean, they were utterly irrelevant to history. They're an interesting footnote, but really nothing more. And there are people who have come out against the genocide very vehemently. I mean, I think in this country, probably the most prominent of them is Owen Jones, the Guardian columnist, who played such a major part, incidentally, in the false anti-Semitism smears in the Labour Party. But I think we have to say to such people that what is happening is the logical extension of Zionism, that Zionism began with ethnic cleansing and it is now ending with genocide. And I know that some people, not least the Metropolitan Police, who arrested me last Friday for drawing the links between Zionism and Nazi Germany, don't like it. But this was exactly the same with in Nazi Germany. It didn't start off with a program of extermination. From 1933 to 1941, the policy was one of ethnic cleansing. Even up to the end, it subscribed to the Madagascar project, whereby it would transfer Jews to the island of Madagascar. It was only when, during the war, that was impossible, they turned to the final solution and the extermination. And the same is true of Zionism. I mean, we talk about genocide in Gaza. What we're talking about is extermination. Although the official tally is 40,000, it is accepted that for every death that is recorded, there may be 3 to 5 or even more indirect deaths. So we are actually talking of hundreds of thousands of people who are being killed through starvation, through disease, and so on. And we have to say to people like Owen Jones, it's time to recognize that Zionism is a genocidal project, and you have to face up to that, and you have to face up to all the illusions that you had that it was some form of Jewish self-determination. It's also, I think, never been clearer what Western imperialism is about, that it will tolerate absolutely any atrocity that you can think of. I mean, just imagine, for example, that Hamas planted a bomb in the middle of Jerusalem because it wanted to kill or assassinate Netanyahu. And it managed to, but it killed 100 or more people. Can you imagine the headlines in the popular press about the terrorism of Hamas, the brutality, the bloodthirsty savages that they are, etc.? Yet Israel dropped, I think it was 10 2,000-pound bombs in the middle of Beirut, a built-up city. And Joe Biden and Kamala Harris welcome it. I mean, this, I think, should demonstrate to everyone that terrorism is only what our enemies do. We are never terrorists, however many we kill, however we kill them, in what methods we use. Terrorism is for the other side, or in the words of, I think it was Lord Carrington, the British Foreign Secretary, Thatcher's first, one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. That applies today just as it has in the past. The other, of course, consequence is the attack on civil liberties at home. We've seen in Germany extreme repression of the Palestine Solidarity movement, the physical invasion by the German police of the Palestine Congress, for example, the attacks on Jewish anti-Zionists just as much as Palestine Solidarity supporters. The German state defines its reason to be as the existence of the Israeli state. Well, that, of course, is very convenient. But what they're doing is actually following in the footsteps of the Nazi state itself, because I've written about this in my book. The Zionists were the favorite children of the Nazis amongst the Jewish population right up to 1939, because they too agreed that Jews should not mix with non-Jews. So the German state supporting Israel, right or wrong, is a logical consequence of that. Many people, I think, who believe that the German state supports Israel as a way of expiating its guilt are actually wrong. I don't think there is so much as guilt as a need to actually normalize and relativize its genocide, not only against the Jews, the Gypsies, and so on, but also its involvement in both the Armenian and then the Herero Nama genocides in Southwest Africa. So Germany has a particular role, but it's also true here. I mentioned the fact that when I drew comparisons between Zionism, Israel, and the Nazis, I was arrested at the picket of Tzipi Hotovely, the Israeli ambassador to London, last Friday. I'm not the only one. People were arrested and have contacted me on the demonstration the following day. This has been a repeated pattern in Britain. It's one that we have to call out and we have to fight. But I mean, freedom of speech is under attack and under threat as a result. And not only just here, if we look at international law, the ICJ and the ICC, it is still the case with the ICC that the warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant have not been issued. It is going to a full panel of judges, I understand. Contrast that with the issuing of a warrant for arrest of Vladimir Putin. It took place on one day. There was no drawn out legal process. It went through literally in a flash. And I think that shows the politicized nature of the institutions of the international law. And although we appeal to international law, we can really have no illusions whatsoever in its efficacy, because the major gap in international law has always been the lack of any effective enforcement mechanism. And that's more true today than ever. I mean, we have the United States Congress debating whether to apply sanctions to the court for daring to issue warrants. So, I mean, that is the hypocrisy that we labor under. But it's also clear, and we see it very, very clearly, that the Arab regimes, many of which are integrally linked with Israel militarily and economically, are part of the problem. If the Arab regimes had said they were going to stop the oil on day one, the genocide would never even have got off the ground. They bear a major responsibility for what is happening. And in practice, many of them have given the green light to what has happened, the Saudi and the Gulf chieftains in particular. The final thing I just want to say, which is the title of this talk, is about two states. I mean, Britain's Palestine Solidarity Movement still refuses to take a position of opposition to two states. And my own view is quite clear. It is crucially important that the Palestine Solidarity Movement, in all its aspects, comes out explicitly against the illusion that there can ever be two states, that the Israeli state can live in peace with its neighbors or with its own Palestinian population. That is simply impossible. Two states is an apartheid neo-colonial solution, and we must treat it accordingly. It also enables many people, like our trade union leaders, for example, to both sides the question. On the one hand, they support the Palestinians, but on the other hand, they support the right of Israel to exist. Two states does indeed support the right of Israel to exist. So for that, if no other reason, we should be firmly opposed to a two-state solution, and the sooner the better. And that means in Britain that the Palestine Solidarity Campaign has to come out against two states and to forego all the excuses and the pretexts for not doing so, such as the Palestinians. It's a question for the Palestinians. We know very well that given the choice, a free choice, the vast majority of Palestinians would choose to live in one democratic state and not a Bantustan in the West Bank. But in any case, that is simply impossible. I hope I haven't taken up too much time, but thank you very much.
Thank you, comrade. Yeah, indeed. Well, PSC and the trade unions still support that fantasy of a two-state solution. And by the way, I doubt very much that international law exists independently of the imperialist powers in any case, even if